Here.
Lunsman.
Here.
Rife.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Bunceness. Olson.
Here.
Rux. Mayor Shoneman.
Here. Please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first order of business is to approve last week's minutes for Monday, August 19th. Can I get a motion to approve?
Second.
Who's the first?
I'll
Second.
move it.
Motion Renee, second Remley. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. First order of business is the open forum will be presented to by Wendy Van Dyne, sorry about that, of Stantec to present the new Aberdeen Recreational Trail Plan. Wendy, would you make your way forward, and you've got the floor.
Well, good evening, Mayor and members of Aberdeen City Council. It's very nice to have an opportunity to visit with you this morning and this evening. It's already been a long day. And present the final version of the Aberdeen Recreational Trails Plan Study Update. This has been a fantastic project engaging many stakeholders here within the city of Aberdeen. Tonight is the culmination of more than 12 months of effort in working with local stakeholders, both here at the city as well as with Aberdeen Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Department, and with local business organizations, K-12 institutions, and higher education institutions to help envision and identify what recreational trail connections can be planned for and established throughout the city. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to present the final plan. Also want to acknowledge this evening the project sponsors, Steve Graham from the South Dakota Department of Transportation, as well as our local partners with the Aberdeen Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Department, certainly Brett Bill, City Manager Lynn Lander, and others who served on the state advisory team, and our local partners Helms and Associates and Confluence out of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. At Stantec, safety is always important to us, and even at presentations like this, it's always an opportunity to highlight to the public how to be safe, utilizing our transportation infrastructure, and certainly tonight want to highlight a couple of safety considerations, especially as we think about our students going back to school. School safety is important, especially when we consider a trails master plan such as this one, because many of our students use trail systems and sidewalks connections to make their way to and from their homes every single day. So as we think about safety, and certainly with school starting last week, just a few reminders to those of us who have students and in the school systems here throughout South Dakota. Before school begins or the school year begins, it's always important to walk the route with your students so that they're familiar with the various routes and obstacles that they might encounter. Teach your student, whether they're walking or biking or even riding the bus, to obey all traffic signals and to make sure that they're being safe. If your student bikes to school, make sure that they wear a helmet and make sure that it fits correctly. And then finally, always make sure that your student knows their home phone number, your cell phone number, knows how to reach you in case of an emergency, or knows how to contact another trusted adult, and also knows how to contact 911 in case of an emergency. So thank you for honoring that safety moment here. Before we begin, I quickly want to introduce the Aberdeen Recreational Trails Plan to you. I realize that you had an opportunity to review the 125-page document prior to this evening, and it is a lot of information to cover. But I do want to be cognizant of our time that we have available with you this evening, and want to just highlight some of the key aspects of the plan which I feel are most important as we've developed the final draft and presented it to the various stakeholders here locally. So the key items that I'd like to cover, want to highlight the plan process that we've utilized from every step of the way as we began the project last August to where we are today. Also want to highlight and review with you the prioritized network that we've identified and recommended as as part of our final recommendations within the document. Also want to review the wayfinding development or wayfinding plan that has been developed to help encourage the use of the trail throughout the community. And then also want to round out our presentation this evening by presenting some education initiatives that we've identified, as well as some encouragement initiatives. Those being various partnerships and programs that the city and the Parks and Recreation District might engage with K-12 providers or even higher education providers in helping to promote the safe and active use of the trail system here within the city. Finally, want to round out and complete my presentation by highlighting some implementation measures, as well as identifying some of the first steps in implementation and some steps that the city might want to take in terms of engaging some of the stakeholder groups, implementation committees, to help establish the city of Aberdeen as a bicycle-friendly community. So begin this evening by highlighting the plan process. As I mentioned, this evening's presentation is the culmination of 12 months worth of effort. We kicked off our project with the South Dakota Department of Transportation and the study advisory team a year ago, August 29th. So this is almost exactly 1 year from when we started. And from the very beginning, we worked very closely with the study advisory team comprised of many folks here within the community, including Planning Director Brett Bill, City Manager Lynn Lander, certainly City Engineer Robin Bobzine, Chief McNeil, as well as Councilman David Bunsness. So there was a lot of interaction, a lot of engagement from the city at all aspects and all phases of design. And throughout the course of the project, we kicked off our project with a study advisory team meeting with the South Dakota Department of Transportation last August. And then last fall, we really focused on engaging stakeholders within the community to hear firsthand thoughts on what works well right now with the trail system, where some of those gaps might be, identifying where key destinations are, where additional trail connections would benefit not only those who use the trail system recreationally, but also who use the trail system as a mode of transportation here within the city. And we had an open house, a community open house last November 7th and 8th, I believe it was, at the Eagle's Nest. We also have conducted a number of study advisory team meetings throughout the course of the study. Following our open house last November, we held 4 study advisory team meetings where we started to review not only the feedback from the community, but also the various options and alternatives for where connections might be established and what types of bicycling and pedestrian facilities might be best implemented or developed along the corridors that were identified as priorities. Last April, we convened once again and held a number of stakeholder meetings at the Aberdeen Cultural Center, along with business representatives of the business community, representatives of the local universities and higher education institutions, as well as the K-12 community and local bicycle and advocacy organizations. So we had another open house last April where we presented our draft recommendations, and then since that time we've been incorporating all of that feedback to compile a draft document which was submitted to the study advisory team in June and was previously accepted earlier this month by the Aberdeen Parks Board, and which we're presenting to you this evening. The vision that was established by the study advisory team identifies that biking and walking are safe, accessible, and comfortable choices for all people here within the city. And by achieving that vision, 4 key goals are as follows. Connectivity. Develop a connected network of bicycling and walking routes that connect Aberdeen's residential areas with the downtown, the university campuses, schools, parks, and commercial areas. Safety and comfort. Build and maintain safe and comfortable bicycling and walking facilities for people of all ages and abilities. Education. Sponsor education initiatives that promote safe practices for bicyclists, pedestrians, and motorists alike. And then finally, encouragement. Increase participation, planning, and events of bicycles and pedestrian activities within the community of Aberdeen. All of these aspects go into what we have compiled within this plan document. Thinking about the community engagement activities that we initially achieved, not only last fall, but then also throughout the course of this project, we've had 2 public open houses. One was conducted on November 8th of last year, and then another one earlier this year on April 30th, of which we had more than 50 in attendance, and we had a great conversation with many local residents who attended that, so we got firsthand perspectives and feedbacks. Actually had a chance to map out which routes residents would like to see developed here within the city. We also had attendance at the Chamber Mixer, where we were able to visit with members of the business community and hear what their thoughts are regarding the bicycling and walking trails here. And then we also held 2 series of stakeholder meetings, each more than a day long, visiting with various groups throughout the community. And from those stakeholder meetings, we held conversations with, again, more than 50 attendees, both at the beginning of the project and then at the conclusion of the project. Throughout the duration of the project, we've also hosted a project website where we've received more than 1,000 unique hits, and we've received more than 450 visitors who've been leaving comments and contacting us throughout the study exercise. We also provided an opportunity for a project GIS map where residents were able to go out and map the routes that they would like to see, put pins in specific destinations where they see are important here within the city and where they'd like to see additional infrastructure developed. And then we had more than 80 specific comments from that online GIS map. And we used that directly as we worked with the study advisory team to identify where those priorities and where those linkages would need to occur here within the city to increase connectivity. We also sent out an online survey to solicit thoughts and feedback regarding the types of facilities that people feel comfortable using, whether they're on-street bike lanes or whether they're off-street sidewalks, 10-foot wide recreational paths. We received more than 400 responses from those online surveys, which is a tremendous response for a study like this. And then we also convened community kiosks, which were 24 by 36 boards, which solicited input from the community at large on the different types of bicycling and walking facilities. Again, we received more than 100 responses, and we had them at locations around town, such as here at City Hall, as well as at Rural Rooster, Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, the library, the ARC, many locations where we were able to solicit and provide many different opportunities for the community to weigh in on this study. As we started to synthesize and review all of this information that we collected, there were a number of public input themes that came to light. Lighting was a big consideration, wanting to see additional lighting to increase safety, especially given the darker months of the wintertime when we do have a lot of avid bicyclists and walkers and runners who use the off-road trails through some of our green spaces here within the city. Also heard a lot about sidewalks, just having greater connectivity, filling in some of those gaps that currently exist within the network so that as students, especially as they go to school within the heart of the downtown area of the city, have access to achieve some of those connections. Also thinking about amenities that would provide respite to those who use the system, especially if they're traveling for miles at a time. Are there opportunities for water fountains or even bike repair stations? Thinking about some of those key destinations that we need to connect to, Wiley Park, Roosevelt, the downtown space. Those were all really, really important. As we dove deeper into some of those connections, we asked specific questions through the online survey as well as through the online GIS mapping system about where people would like to see new trail connections developed in the community. Some commonalities that we heard over and over again: 6th Avenue is a primary commercial corridor. Certainly it's very busy and a lot of people feel unsafe. So are there other routes or other alignments that we can consider and promote bicycling and walking activity that get people off of that main thoroughfare and get them into a safer corridor to still reach some of those commercial destinations on the east side of town? Also thinking about Wiley Park connections. Wiley Park is a tremendous tourist destination for the city of Aberdeen throughout the region and throughout the Northern Plains area. So what are some other connections that we can get to Wiley Park from some of the key aspects within the downtown space? Also thinking about connectivity within the downtown area, and I'll show a map here in a moment that helps illustrate the current conditions of the trail system here within Aberdeen. Aberdeen today has a tremendous trail system. I would like to compliment you on your efforts in developing the trail system that you have because it's a fantastic start. Where we look at where gaps might be currently, when you look at the map, there are a lot of gaps within the downtown space. And we heard that over and over again from a lot of the residents who we engaged with throughout this study. So one thing that we looked at are what are those opportunities for increasing connectivity within the downtown area. Also looked at increasing connectivity between Central, Roncalli, as well as to the college campuses, both at Northern and then as well as at Presentation. Also looking at long-term connectivity, especially as the city of Aberdeen grows over the next 10 years, 20 years, looking at where those hubs of neighborhoods are going to be developed along the outskirts of town and making long-term provisions that those connections can happen as new roadway improvements are addressed and as opportunities for funding sources become available, whether it be through federal agencies or State Department of Transportation. And then also looking at and evaluating some of the existing crossings that we've heard on Melgard and some of those key areas where we sometimes see conflicts. So we also solicited input from the community regarding what else can be done to encourage more use of the trail system. Connectivity, greater connectivity was at the top of the list. Also prioritizing connections between existing segments, especially those segments that might be aligned with some of the primary destinations here in town, where you see a lot of activity and where people want to bike with their kids or go do their shopping. They want an alternative to having to drive in their car, can get on their bike and ride somewhere. We heard a lot about enforcing crosswalk laws and addressing distracted driving. Certainly there is some advocacy and some education that can happen both with pedestrians and bicyclists, but also certainly with drivers, so that they are also aware that the rules of the road apply to bicyclists as well as them, and that they can learn how to share the road and understand how to watch for pedestrians and bicyclists within the crosswalks and within those key intersections. Also, distracted driving was something that we heard a lot about, not only from local law enforcement, but also from bicyclists and pedestrians who are out and about and see that happen on a regular basis, and it becomes very concerning to them. We also heard a lot about the idea of creating a loop around town without intersections. What are some off-road loops that we could develop for the long term that could be used for local races, local bike events, to help promote just a broader use of the system? It can help advocate for the trail system as a destination. So that is one thing that we looked at in terms of long-term priorities for the plan. And then also finally thinking about lighting, wayfinding, and water fountains, which always help to increase use and promote the active use of the trail plan. So we received all of this feedback, and we took that feedback then and we began to identify priorities for trail segments. This is an exhibit that illustrates the existing system of trails here within the city. So all of those green lines that you see, those are your existing off-road trails. Those are trails typically 10 feet wide, either concrete or asphalt, that are located within greenways, existing easements, parks. They're located outside of the roadway right away. And so those are maintained primarily by the Parks and Recreation entities, but they provide great connection with many of the destinations around town. The blue lines that you see are roadside trails. So those are typically like your sidewalk trails, your street adjacent trails. Again, anywhere between 8 feet to 10 feet wide, typically constructed of concrete. And they provide great connectivity along some of the primary vehicular thoroughfares and arterials here throughout the city. The burgundy lines, which you see, designate bike lanes, and we have one bike lane which currently exists here within the city today, from the Prairie Trail out east to Roosevelt. And that is one instance of that type of facility that you have here today. So one thing that we talked about collectively with the study advisory team was, how do we introduce more bike lanes? And if we do, what does that look like in terms of their design and how people use them? And how can we promote or encourage more people to feel comfortable using on-street bike lanes? Or is that something that residents feel comfortable using? So as we thought about the existing framework plan, certainly taking into consideration all of the previous studies that have been completed, not only by the Aberdeen Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Department with their Trails Master Plan, but certainly with the Metropolitan Transportation Plan that was developed in 2013, as well as with all of the feedback that we received from the online mapping feature, we compiled a full build-out recommendation for what future connectivity might look like within the city of Aberdeen. So this exhibit illustrates, again, a final full build out of all of our recommendations. These are the primary corridors that we've identified could could host either street side or roadside trails or off-road trails. And many of these connections were identified by the amount of right-of-way that's available to build these facilities and construct them, as well as where we anticipate future growth patterns happening here within the city. All of the blue lines, again, represent roadside trails, again, those 10-foot wide sidewalk trails that would be developed in conjunction with street projects. The green lines represent the off-road trails. Those are the types of trails that could be developed in conjunction with, alongside stream corridors or even along levee systems or within green spaces. And then the burgundy lines illustrate where the potential locations are for potential bike lanes. When we looked at the downtown area, that was one challenge that we had. Current ordinances prohibit bicycling on sidewalks, and we recognize that those ordinances are in place for a reason. So what are other ways in which we can promote bicycle activity and help increase connectivity within the downtown space? One way is through bike lanes. So we encourage the city to think about how bike lanes could potentially be introduced within the downtown framework to help fill in some of those gaps which currently exist. And we have offered some recommendations within the final draft report, which you've had a chance to review prior to this evening. Finally, the lavender lines represent not necessarily specific bicycle lanes, but just signed bicycle routes. So those lines are located on neighborhood streets with lower traffic volumes. So it's not necessary to indicate or specifically mark a traffic lane or a bicycle lane, more so than it is to just sign the segment, because traffic volumes are such that they're generally located in quiet neighborhoods and traffic isn't foreseen as an issue. But those are opportunities to still address connectivity, either east-west or north-south into some of those primary off-road trail or roadside trail segments. As we looked at the full build out of the system, one way that we started to address priorities, because it is quite a bit to think about implementing over the next decade and even beyond, is how do we establish priorities? One thing that we would really like to see as a result of this plan is to encourage greater use of the system. One way to encourage greater use is to develop loops or themed rides around the city. So as we looked at that and we considered how that might be implemented, we established a series of short-term implementation loops and long-term implementation loops. So the short-term loops, which we've identified on this exhibit, utilize 99% of existing trail infrastructure as it exists here in Aberdeen today. With the modification or addition of just a couple of segments in a few key locations, all of these loops, with the addition of wayfinding and signage, of course, could feasibly be implemented. And you'll see we have a variety of different loop lengths, all the way from just over 2.5 to just under 6 miles. Some of them are a combination of off-road and on-road, and some of them are majority off-road trails. So this near-term loop system provides many different opportunities for riders of all skills and abilities. As we think about the long-term development of the plan, it's necessary to think about how the community will grow, how those transportation corridors will be developed, and how are some ways in which we can address connectivity to those outlying neighborhoods, but then also plan for long-term loop routes. When we visited with stakeholders, we certainly met with participants of local bicycle and running advocacy groups who are very interested in seeing something of this sort developed to promote and help support some of the bike races and running races that they have. So one of the key pieces of feedback that we heard was to develop a perimeter loop all the way around the city of Aberdeen. And certainly we recognize the logistical concerns and the challenges that come with that. But if we can identify a series of longer-term priorities that do help start to lay the groundwork for that perimeter loop, you can plan for some of those improvements in the future. So this is the series of longer-term loops that you see, and these are greater distances, anywhere from just over 6 miles to just over 9 miles in length. To help sign these configurations and these loops to encourage more people to use the system, certainly wayfinding is important. So another aspect of the study investigated how wayfinding might be addressed and planned for to not only establish signage of these different themed rides, but also to incorporate and address trailheads and places where people can fix their bikes or even have respite stations, get a drink of water, park their bike, take a rest for a spell. And so these exhibits that you're going to see here in the next couple slides do highlight some specific areas where we can locate various trailheads, both for the long-term loops as well as for the short-term loops. And then within this section of the master planning document, we've also worked with Confluence, our project partners, to design a preliminary wayfinding system that helps address many of the needs that we foresee will be required of users of the system. So you can see here we've got a number of different signage types, utilizing existing infrastructure from existing street lights, especially along those roadside trails, to help indicate that folks are on the right path or the right route that they're trying to stay course. And then we also have smaller signs, smaller maps, as well as kiosks and mile markers that help convey and communicate the overall trail system, as well as keep folks on track with where they are within each route. And you would think that in today's age of technology, most runners have watches, they've got their Garmins, they've got their smartphones. This is just one aspect to help support all of that. You would be surprised at the number of runners and bicyclists who say that they actually prefer to disconnect when they run or when they use the system, and that these types of wayfinding measures would be really helpful. One thing that we also would recommend and that we discussed quite a bit about as a study advisory team was what other measures might also bolster wayfinding measures. And certainly online or mobile apps where that would be joined or coordinated with this wayfinding system would certainly be important to consider for the future. And those wayfinding apps could not only help communicate where folks are within the trail system, but also help communicate safety. The safe riding procedures help make sure that they're being safe when they're utilizing the trail system as a whole. As we think about education initiatives, one thing that we talked about quite a bit was what are the top education issues to address? Certainly as we met with members of the higher education community as well as with the K-12 community, both public as well as private here in Aberdeen, and even with the Boys and Girls Club, we heard about a number of initiatives that are currently underway, and we talked about different ways in which these measures could continue to be supported and promoted to increase education initiatives. So when we talked as a study advisory team, we considered a whole list of more than 20 different measures that could be considered for education initiatives. And we took a poll of the study advisory team, and these top 5 are what we concluded would be the most effective for the community. So the top education issues that we would like to address and of which we would like to see the city keep a priority on is to develop materials on road safety for pedestrians, bicycles, and vehicle drivers. And within the final plan, we have offered links to example communities that have developed these types of materials, so you're not starting from scratch and that you can utilize many of the publications that are currently available to the public. Once you have these materials developed, then you can assemble simple pamphlets on bicycle and pedestrian safety and work with local businesses and even local schools or even the Boys and Girls Clubs and the YMCA and the health organizations to help make them available to the public. Also would like to see some safety educational programs at schools. Right now, the Aberdeen Police Department does a tremendous job at hosting bicycle rodeos here within the local public schools. Certainly the Boys and Girls Club also has their own bike rodeo in the summertime. But as we visited with Presentation College and certainly with Northern, we heard that there's also interest in potentially partnering with them and their students to help increase these types of programs and get greater access to various groups throughout the community. So that's an opportunity and a partnership to consider. Also, school visits by law enforcement. Those currently do happen, and Chief McNeil's officers do a great job at reaching out to the students and establishing those connections. But certainly, as more resources become available and as resources are addressed in the future, just to continue those, and again, even partnering with local agencies to provide more of those boots on the ground to help build education initiatives. And then finally, the last measure that we wanted to consider and that we recommended is identifying special programs or sessions for parents during PTA meetings. Beginning of the school year is a great opportunity, especially as you have open houses for some of your schools where you can have stations. And again, this is a great chance to partner with advocacy groups like your bicycle groups, your running groups, even local businesses to help man those stations just to increase education for students as they're out there using the system, as they're out there riding their bikes on a regular basis, and as they're using the sidewalks and how to cross streets safely. I know as a parent, I'm always trying to communicate to my kids how to get across the street and how to walk wait for the signals and to look both ways. But it takes a time or two sometimes, and it takes repetition and a lot of consistency to reiterate those ideas. Finally, our fourth aspect to the plan was identifying encouragement initiatives. And when we think about encouragement, we can think about encouragement in two different ways. One way is to think about the encouragement to build a safe and comfortable bicycling and walking network, or you can also encourage users to utilize a safe and comfortable bicycling network. So these go hand in hand, and they shouldn't just be one or the other. As we think about considerations that are effective and recommendations that are effective, it's a combination of both of these schools of thought. So as we talked about collectively with the study advisory team, again, similar to the education considerations, we looked at more than 20 different recommendations. We took priorities, and these were the top 6 priorities that we identified in terms of encouragement. So the first is an encouragement to build or to promote the development of a trail infrastructure. And that is to provide increased oversight of ordinances mandating sidewalks be built when streets are constructed and parcels are platted. And that's to help avoid gaps in the network. So what that does is, if you are, for instance, riding with your student on Roosevelt, and the sidewalk trail goes on one side of the road, and then all of a sudden there's a gap in the infrastructure. There's an undeveloped lot. Then you have to cross Roosevelt and then continue on the trail on the other side. And as you can imagine, those gaps do cause jogs and do cause safety concerns. And so these ordinances are a way, and they've already been put in place by the City of Aberdeen to get around and to help reinforce a full build-out of the trail system. We also considered events to encourage bicycling and walking, such as open streets or a cyclovia. These are events where you can close down your streets and have a street festival where you can open them up to bicyclists and families, and it's a great community activity. It's a great opportunity to partner with the Chamber of Commerce or local downtown business organizations to get greater activity not only into your downtown area, but also into some of your residential neighborhoods. We also considered partnering with local businesses and chambers of commerce to provide discounts to walkers and bicyclers. Again, promoting an active lifestyle, getting people out there to be healthy and active and engaged in the community. This is a great way to offer some of those incentives, as well as to support local businesses in the community. And then also support active use by providing printed and online bicycle and trail facility maps, which tie in directly to some of our wayfinding recommendations within the plan. Finally, our last 2 bullet points here, developing themed and signed loop walks and rides, and then increasing lighting along trails, specifically along those off-road trail segments that might be going through natural areas or green spaces or parks where you don't have the overflow of street lighting providing that lighting source. We, within the trail plan, we did not specifically recommend any specific policies or ordinances which should be adopted. That certainly wasn't the role of the trail plan. But we did want to acknowledge the presence of e-bikes, especially as the state of South Dakota has recently adopted measures to support e-bikes throughout communities throughout the state as of January 1st of next year. So thinking ahead, what are some of those considerations that the city might want to think about as e-bikes become more prevalent on our trails and as more residents become accustomed to using them? Right now, the state characterizes e-bikes into 3 specific categories. The first is your Class 1 bikes. Those are your bikes that are only electric assisted when the user is pedaling. So it's not like a motorized bike. It's only when they're actively pedaling, and they only go up to 20 miles an hour. Once the rider reaches that threshold, then they cease to operate, and you're on your own power once again. Your Class 2 e-bikes are your electric assist when you're pedaling and when you're not pedaling. But again, that cap is listed at 20 miles an hour. Your Class 3 e-bikes are electric assist only when the user is pedaling, but the Class 3 bikes go above 20 miles an hour and cap at 28 miles an hour. So as of January 1st, the state of South Dakota will allow Class 1 and Class 2 e-bikes unless otherwise prohibited by local municipalities. So it is something to think about. And when we visited with the park board earlier this month, we had a lengthy discussion about what e-bikes look like and how they might impact communities. And certainly, we talked about the use. Why are people using e-bikes? We're seeing a lot of older generations, seniors, utilize e-bikes as a way to stay active and to help provide transportation options for them when they want to get out and about in the community, but don't always have the mobility to ride a standard bicycle. So they are user assisted, and they do provide a great transportation option for residents. When we think about implementation, it's important, especially when we look at a full build out to the capacity that we've planned for the community, especially thinking about those long-term growth considerations, that there are specific priorities, certainly within the first 5 years, that you can start to look at and start to actively identify projects or funding sources for. So within the plan, if you recall, there are 2 specific buckets of trail types that we've identified. The first type is off-road trails, and then the second type is street-side trails. So what we did with our final recommendations is we ran a series of criteria, which trail segments are located on a loop configuration, which segments of trail provide greatest accessibility to primary destinations and commercial centers around town, which segments provide greater connectivity to the higher growth areas of town and underserved neighborhoods of town. And we use those criteria to establish what your top 5 priorities might be for both your off-road trails as well as your roadside trails. And so what you'll see here in this exhibit is those segments listed in burgundy are your roadside priorities. Those segments listed in or illustrated in the dark green are your off-road priorities for the community. And even thinking more broadly, you'll find in the master planning document, we have evaluated each one of these segments individually and identified what some of the challenges and opportunities are for developing them. Some things to think about even before you get into the design process or incorporate them into potential projects. But we also recognize the need to acknowledge the broader system as a whole and think about, okay, as the community grows, what are some projects or what segments of trail make sense to complete at once? And so we have compiled a master document or master exhibit within the document that each of these segments of trail correlates to a number on a budget spreadsheet where we have identified not only the location of the trail, but also the length of the segment and potential costs that might be associated with implementing that trail, along with the appropriate facility type, whether that be a bike lane or a 10-foot wide recreational trail. So I want to highlight the fact that this exhibit, the numbers that are associated with each of these segments do not designate priority. They're just a way to identify and correlate them to that master spreadsheet. So Table 7.1 within the final master planning document does break out each one of these segments of trail and highlights where their beginning point is or where their end point is, the type of facility that it could be, the total length, and whether it's located on a long-term loop or a short-term loop, and then an estimate of cost for implementing a trail of this type. Based upon today's numbers and our current understanding at a planning level overview for the type of implementation that might be required. So we've provided that not only for roadside trails, and we have it broken out into 2 different tables, one for on-road or roadside trail segments, and then a separate one for off-road trail segments. And the off-road trail segments are certainly longer in some places because we are looking at introducing trails along creeks as well as in some naturalized areas that would need some infrastructure. When we think about ways to approach these projects, certainly it's important to think about not only how they could be incorporated within capital improvements projects with transportation opportunities, but also through various funding sources, whether that be at the state level or at the federal level. So within the final plan document, we have also identified various parameters of funding sources that you might be thinking about in the coming years, especially as you look at those priorities and how you can start to track them and identify them for implementation. We have also identified within Section 7 of the final document, along with those funding sources, again, identifying and specifically calling out those key improvements or those key segments that we would recommend getting installed in the near future. And then we also highlight the education and the encouragement implementation priorities. Education and encouragement implementation are a little bit take a little bit softer approach. Certainly, with trail infrastructure, you can go out, there are specific projects that you can plan for, but with education and encouragement, it's really important to think about community partnerships and leveraging the efforts not only of your city staff, but also with many of the local business organizations and advocacy organizations and education entities here within the city. So we have identified, again, the priorities and then potential partners, community partners that might be engaged to help get those things going. So in conclusion this evening, I realize that there's a lot of information to digest within this document. It again, has been the culmination of 12 months worth of work, incorporating the efforts of a study advisory team, as well as from the State Department of Transportation and various stakeholder groups. But what do the next steps look like for this plan? The Parks Board has accepted the plan. I want to make sure I highlight that. They have accepted it. They have not approved it. It is the purpose of the study is to accept the plan and to use it as a guiding document going forward. So next steps, once you accept the plan, some priorities that we would like for you to consider. Think about assembling an implementation committee. I'm from Bismarck, North Dakota. That's where I currently reside. We recently wrapped up the bicycle and pedestrian master plan for the Bismarck-Main community. And certainly, as you can imagine, there are a lot of miles of trails that were proposed within that plan. And there was a lot of uncertainty about how to proceed. Well, the first step that the city took and that the local MPO took was to establish a bicycle and pedestrian implementation committee. So that implementation committee is comprised of local stakeholder organizations, representatives both from the city as well as from Parks and Recreation, and interested residents who actively want to see these types of facilities improve the quality of life that they experience in Aberdeen, take a role in getting those partnerships established and continuing forward momentum for this plan. I'll use Bismarck as an example. Our implementation committee is comprised of folks from both cities, as well as from the State Department of Transportation, as well as from the League of American Bicyclists and local health organizations. Burleigh County Public Health is a stakeholder in this group. And we're all working together to try to figure out next steps. What types of activities, what types of educational partnerships can we look at and establish to help build encouragement and education for these types of trails and facilities? The next step that I would recommend, certainly when the South Dakota Department of Transportation issued the call for requests for proposals for this project, one of the primary priorities that was listed as a result of this plan was to establish Aberdeen as a bicycle-friendly community. The League of American Bicyclists is a nationally recognized organization that works with many municipalities across the country to identify those which support active and healthy lifestyles and which can advocate and market themselves as a bicycle-friendly community. Certainly, there are a number of key evaluation criteria that go into designating and applying for this designation, and there are different levels that cities can be recognized for. The very lowest level is a bronze level certification or recognition. The highest is a platinum level, and certainly depending on where a community falls. For instance, I think Boulder, Colorado is currently a platinum recognized bicycle-friendly community. They've been working on their bicycle and trail infrastructure for a long time now, so they are a few steps ahead of many communities. Bismarck, 3 years ago, got recognized as a silver level bicycle-friendly community. Certainly, with the existing infrastructure that you have in Aberdeen, I see no reason why you couldn't be recognized at a minimum as a bronze level bicycle-friendly community, if not silver. Many of the considerations that we've assembled and that we've identified within this master planning document provide the documentation and the certification that you're going to need for this application and to continue forward with momentum and to recognize the culmination of efforts not only from this study, but everything that you've achieved so far with your city infrastructure as well as with your Parks and Recreation infrastructure. And this is another great step to consider. So I'll now open it up for questions that you might have of me or of the final master planning document. Again, thank you for the opportunity to present.
Thank you, Wendy. Great job. Very informative. Council members, has anyone any questions for Wendy? I want to apologize for having slaughtered your name.
That's fine. It happens a lot.
Address many Dutch names on the fly. Doug, great work for the trail system throughout. This is a good building block to start from for sure. So if there's no further questions, thank you on behalf of the committee, and
you.
we'll take a vote in a moment to approve and accept and put into place this, or at least to accept the plan as does the park board. Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
time, Wendy. Next order of business is our routine city business consent calendar. We've got items A through C. Has anyone any questions as it relates to any of those items on the list?
Move to approve.
Second.
A motion from Johnson, a second from Olson. All in favor to approve the consent calendar, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. That motion does carry. We'll move on to new business. First item is to possible approval to accept and place into the official records of the city the recreational trail plan as completed by Stantec, Helms and Associates in Confluence that we just heard about. Can I get a motion to accept that plan?
Motion.
Second.
A motion from Ronayne and a second from Johnson. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, nay. That will be approved. Motion does pass. Thank you very much. Next item to discuss will be the possible first reading of an ordinance relating to zoning regulations of the city code regarding the business use of homes. I'm going to kick that over to Brett. Brett, what can you tell us about this ordinance?
This is ordinance 190801. The ordinance is requested in order to amend section 60-194 of the city code. The section contains the criteria by which a homeowner may operate a business from their home. The ordinance alters, removes certain criteria within this section. These changes will allow for a homeowner to operate a business out of their attached garage by obtaining a special exception from the Aberdeen Board of Zoning Adjustment. Current city code does not permit the operation of a home occupation out of a detached or attached garage. Secondly, this ordinance amendment would allow the homeowner to have one employee that does not reside on premise. Currently, all employees shall be members of the family and reside on the premise. Finally, this ordinance amendment removes the requirements that all mechanical equipment utilized for the home business must be something that would normally be utilized within the dwelling, not for household use. This ordinance amendment was approved by the Planning Commission by a 6-1 vote. The 1 nay vote, the Planning Commissioner did not want to see home occupation within a garage.
Has anyone any questions for Brett as it relates to the details of this ordinance? Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion to approve the first reading of this ordinance.
Move to approve. I'll second it.
Got a motion from Mark Remley and a second from Alan Johnson. Carl, can I get a roll call vote from you, please?
Can we have maybe
have
a
discussion?
moment for discussion?
Oh, sorry. Getting right to it, I guess. Let's hear what you got. Alan, what sort of questions, concerns?
Just on its
comments?
face, I'm curious why we've been operating without these 3 changes for a long time. To your satisfaction, Brett, are there concerns outside of the 6-1 vote that we should be considering as we're considering a vote?
I guess when I originally wrote this 20 years ago, I was looking to maintain the residential character of the neighborhoods, but still letting people have their business within their home. The ordinance amendments now came up through requests of the mayor, then forward to myself through the city manager.
Mayor, what kind of businesses would you see this enabling or allowing that you would like to see?
Sure. Well, one great example of a business success story from Aberdeen's recent history is a company called World Classrooms. Now, it was actually started in Prairiewood, but it wouldn't have been allowed in Aberdeen. And the reason for that is because it was 2 business partners that worked out of one of the guys' homes until they had established the business enough to move into their own office. So it's a great business. It's really fast growing. It might not have gotten to the point where it is today. So I thought that was one component that would be very beneficial. Another is I've just heard so many great success stories of businesses operating out of their garages, and we've made it all but impossible to do so here. I mean, if you look down the list of historic, very successful businesses, you'd see like Disney and Mattel and Google and Amazon, and the list goes on of people that have. But I would see maybe from a little bit more of a practical purpose here, things like sales fulfillment and that sort of a thing.
Do you see any issues with code enforcement if this were passed?
There's always issues with code enforcement. I mean, it's always a problem to have people maintain their yards and their properties. So is this going to cause another problem? Yes, no, it's hard to tell. But anytime you're going to have somebody with a business in their garage, I feel you're going to see part of their business bleed out into their yard. And then that's going to be an issue for us.
Mike, have you got a question?
Well, I do, and I would comment on the code enforcement side of things just because of my experience here with the city. Garages are meant for cars, vehicles, and we would run many times into folks that don't use their garages for cars. They use them for storage. Consequently, you have cars scattered all over the yards. We've addressed that with an ordinance, parking on your properties. But the other thing you see, I mean, if we allow a business in there, yes, it'll go through this Board of Adjustment, but I just think it's going to provide a lot of improper opportunities in residential neighborhoods. I wouldn't want to see someone running a car business out of their garage, because we've eliminated the section where you can only use those things that are normally found in a home. We could have people putting in lifts in their garages so they could be a mechanic. And that's just one example. I'm concerned about this. And I think Brett hit it on the head when he says we're trying to preserve the character of our residential neighborhoods. And we've found many illegal home occupations when I worked for the city, and they were in their garages, detached garages, and they got away with it for a few years. And I just think if you're building a garage on your property, it should be used for vehicles. I don't know if you want a shed to store, lawn equipment and things like that. I totally understand that, but I just think if you turn your garage into a home occupation, the things you normally find in your garage are going to have to go somewhere outside, somewhere. So I'm a little concerned about this.
Sure. A couple of points on that. First of all, no toxic explosives, flammables, combustibles, corrosives. The bullet point in the existing ordinance that will not change, I was assured by Brett, would prohibit people from doing automotive trade businesses in a garage anyways. And Brett had personally added the language about, about the approval from the board, and I believe that was probably specific, or he told me it was specifically to make sure that they would have some fingers in approving these businesses to make sure that they wouldn't be things like one of the earlier concerns that had been voiced by a different council member was potential for noise, things like welding shops or, other things like that, or things, that would drive an inordinate amount of traffic. So there's other components that will stay the same that I believe will prohibit automotive repair and automotive services to be found in the garage.
One question for Brett. Would the 20% rule still apply?
It's currently in the ordinance. It stayed in the ordinance. We didn't remove it yet.
Okay.
And as the mayor was alluding to, I did add the special exception for several reasons. One, in order to give the neighbors a say in what's going on in their neighborhood. The property is required to be posted when they're applying for a special exception. It's posted in the American News. Whether people see that in the American News or not, they should see that it's posted in the property. And that gives that neighbor a chance to come to the zoning board meeting. If they're afraid to ask their neighbor what's going on, they can call us. Our number is on the sign. Or they can attend the meeting and voice their concern, or just find out what's going on.
Any other questions anyone has got in terms of discussion about this? Dave, what have you got?
I appreciate what Mike had said about, some of the other types of businesses that could cause a problem in the neighborhoods, but what about the guy that wants to set up a computer and a telephone and just wants to call people, and that's what their business is. They don't harm anybody. They don't, you don't make any noise, you never know they're there. So, I mean, do we hurt certain businesses for the benefit of some that might hurt the neighborhood? So I'm just kind of looking at both sides of the court here to see what would be best for the neighborhoods.
Well, and I trust our Board of Adjustment, I really do. And if it requires a variance, I think I could trust our Board of Adjustment to make the right decisions.
Yeah, I think that a big purpose of this whole thing is to draw attention to the fact that we're a business-friendly community. To be able to market ourselves as a place where it's a good place, favorable place to start a business, make it easier to start a business. It's a good launching pad for businesses that aren't yet big enough to rent a space. It allows people to dip their toe in the water and really take a little bit of a gamble without putting their entire financial interests at play.
Well,
Rob.
actually, Brett, could you would you answer Dave's question? Would that be violative of the current statute?
It would not.
Yeah, that's consistent with what you.
If they were to do that within their home. Okay. And one thing that we're cognizant of too, if people are going to utilize their garage for a type of business where it's, in essence, going to be considered part of a living space, they're going to have to bring that garage up to code, to the building code, to be utilized as such.
Under both current ordinance and the proposed ordinance.
Yep. So it may be cost prohibitive actually for somebody to utilize their garage compared to use their home. It all depends on what they plan on doing and the time frame they're going to do it.
Yeah, and I do think that there's, there are some businesses that are being operated out of garages, to Mike's note, with or without approval, maybe without even people knowing about it. I'd like to create an easier pathway for those people to be operating in compliance with city regulations and laws. Josh?
Brett, do you feel comfortable, as it's written, that something like a mechanic or some sort of auto body shop couldn't open up?
Well, I'm not a fan of people being able to operate a home occupation out of a garage, but with the way that it's written with a special exception, I'm as Mike's alluded to, I'm very comfortable with the Board of Zoning Adjustment doing the right things for the neighborhood.
Alan, have you got something?
I'm writing on the words given there by both of you about that sort of a situation where in B3 it says home occupation shall be conducted primarily between the hours of 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. The sound of a hydraulic ratchet, primarily between the hours up till 10. What if it's 11 or on a weekend it's midnight? Those are not pleasant sounds. And if someone were not quick on the draw and came to a meeting to address it before things were approved, then you have a situation where things can be problematic. So I'm just trying to anticipate and feel some surety that those kinds of things wouldn't be existing and cropping up as complaints in the city too. What would be the protocol if a business like that were to take flight and neighbors would then realize, this wasn't such a great idea?
Well, once it's approved by the zoning board, it's there. They would still have following stipulations the board may have put on that.
There is a point in the ordinance as it stands, which will remain, that says no equipment or process associated with a home occupation may be used which creates noise, dust, smoke, vibration, glare, odors, electrical interference, radio or television transmission interference detachable outside of the dwelling unit. And so I feel like that would present sufficient grounds for a person to challenge a home occupation where this was using a hammer, ratchet, or whichever tool that you had mentioned in the middle of the night or even during business hours.
Question for both of you. Do you anticipate a lot of applications for
I'm
such
hoping
businesses?
so in the grand scheme of things. In my mind, one of the the flagpoles that I've really brought to this this campaign and to this mayorship has really been to make this a really business-friendly community, to encourage people to take a stab at new business ownership. I think that that's going to present better way for our community to continue to grow and thrive and create more opportunities for the young people to be able to stay. So I'd like to eliminate as many barriers to that as possible, and to really give us an opportunity to showcase, what are the efforts that we're actually taking to make this more realistic. So I think that it'll give us a bit of a platform to celebrate the fact that we're encouraging people to do this, and I'm hoping that translates into some successes.
Have we had inquiries before this new ordinance reached us? Where
We've
people
had
would
several,
inquire a lot?
several in recent memory. One went before the Board of Zoning Adjustment, and they were denied. And they went ahead and did it anyway. And then we ended up having to close them down.
What sort of business was that?
It was a gym. And the other gentleman wanted to run more of a sales floor within his garage. And, he knew he was going to be denied from the zoning board for that, just because it didn't fit into any of the parameters of the ordinance. So he never moved forward with that.
Any other discussion from any of the council members? Mark, have you got anything? Rob over there?
I'm satisfied with our current law, so
Yeah.
I will be voting against this.
And I'm ambivalent. I hear the mayor's comments, and I get that. I just don't. I'm number one. I'm worried about property values for citizens. I think you have somebody who's operating, even if it isn't something with a hydraulic wrench in the middle of the night. I think that has an adverse effect on the neighborhood. I'm not sure I would want anybody to have a very active home business next to me, and I don't know who really would. Today, we allow businesses that are completely non-disruptive. I think I'm going to vote against this as well.
Travis,
Is there, Josh?
you talked about a gym, for instance, and that raises a question of parking. So is there anything that addresses the parking for customers or anything like that in this?
In the current ordinance, there is. They can only, if they've got, let me go through here. I got this section for you. It's under 13, new 13. The operation of the home occupation shall not cause or encourage excessive vehicular or pedestrian traffic not ordinarily associated with the residential area in which the home occupation is conducted, except under the following conditions. Occasional parties, meetings, or classes associated with home occupation are permissible. Party meetings or classes shall in no case be held more than 4 times monthly, and vehicles shall in no way impede the safety and flow of traffic within the neighborhood.
So in that case in particular, that was one of the people that had come to me when I was first beginning to discuss this, and it was going to be small group classes of people doing exercises, and those people that didn't feel comfortable in the existing gyms just because of the exposure and personal issues that those people had had. So it was going to be a very kind of an intimate gym type of setting, and they were the ones that were denied for operating a business out of their garage because of the existing ordinance. So I guess if no one has any further questions, Carl, would you go ahead with a roll call vote on the first reading of ordinance to amend the zoning regulations as relates to home business?
Councilmember Remley,
No.
Ronayne,
No.
Lunsman,
Aye.
Reif,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Olson,
No.
Mayor Shonneman.
Aye. To do the math in my head.
4 ayes and 3 noes.
4-3.
Oh. First reading does pass, motion does carry. We'll carry this conversation on to next week with more council members present. Next item that we've got to discuss is the request for the community event permit for the Fallout Creative Community Arts and Music Festival on September 8th in the 200 block of South Main Street. Possible approval or denial of the community event permit for Fallout Creative Communities Art and Music Festival.
Move to
200 block
approve.
of Main Street. We have a motion from Remley and a second.
Second.
Second from Johnson. Has anyone got any questions as it relates to this permit? Is anyone here to speak on behalf of this?
we'll just skip right to all in favor of passing this permit, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, nay. The motion does carry. Next order of business we've got is a change order for the payment number 6 for the street maintenance concrete repair with possible approval of change order number 1 in the amount of $12,316 and payment of the estimate in the amount of $46,445 to CWF Masonry and Construction for the street maintenance concrete repair project. Robin, what have you got to tell us about that project?
The work was done as part of this is the area for the patch and seal program that we do annually. Work was done well, in spite of how much rain and stuff we had. They got things done in a timely manner. We're very happy with the work and recommend change order and the final payment to the contractor.
Sounds good. Can I get a motion to make that payment?
Motion to approve.
Moved. Second, sorry.
Got a motion from Olson and a second from Mark Remley. Let's see here. Carl, can you give us a roll call vote on that one, please?
Councilmember Olson,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Reif,
Aye.
Lunsman,
Aye.
Ronayne,
Aye.
Remley,
Aye.
Mayor Shoneman.
Aye, motion does carry. Next item we've got is the city bills, approval to pay the bill list for August 26th, 2019. Has anyone got any questions or concerns about any of the bills that are presented?
Move to approve.
Second.
Got a motion from Remley and a second from Lunsman to pay the bills. Carl, can I get a roll call vote on that, please?
Councilmember Remley,
Aye.
Ronayne,
Aye.
Lunsman,
Aye.
Reif,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Olson,
Aye.
Mayor Shoneman.
Aye, motion does pass. Next item we've got is the city manager's report. Lynn, what have you got?
I got one quick item. I gave you a copy of the notice by the U.S. Department of Transportation requesting essential air service for Aberdeen. And basically, the notice goes on to say the U.S. Department of Transportation is requesting proposals from air carriers interested in providing essential air service at Aberdeen for a new contract term beginning March 1st, 2020, with or without subsidy. Air carriers should file the proposals no later than September 4th, 2019. And the last subsidy for this service was $1,389,000. And it'll be another 2-year contract, and so they'll be requesting our input after they receive proposals, and those proposals will be uploaded at www.regulations.government for the public to look at them also.
Thank you, Lynn. Has anyone else got anything to discuss prior to adjournment? Rob, what have you got?
Thank you. It was 9 days ago, approximately, that the mayor had a editorial in the paper where he discussed his interest in being employed to draft a new logo for the city. I was immediately concerned when I saw that article in the paper, as I thought it involved an impermissible conflict of interest. I've now spoken with all of my colleagues, including the mayor, about my concern over this conflict. Social media has picked it up. The newspaper has picked it up. Dakota Free Press has picked it up. What is being proposed, as I understand it, is that the mayor, through his company, is seeking a contract from the CVB and from the Chamber of Commerce to draft this new logo and engage a new marketing campaign for the city. Since this article, this editorial, I should say, was published, I've since learned that his company is doing business for the Parks and Rec Department, that his company is also doing some work for the Downtown Association. Unfortunately, I believe these activities violate state law. I see we have a legislator here who was here when South Dakota passed its conflict laws, and our law at Chapter 323-2 says that an elected member of a commission or council may not be a party to a contract with that municipality in which he serves. There are some exceptions, and I do not believe those exceptions are present here. I understand it is the mayor's position that this is an acceptable conduct because he's not doing business directly with the city, that he's doing business with the Chamber of Commerce, with the Convention and Visitors Bureau. I am not persuaded by that technicality that these activities are satisfactory. The Convention and Visitors Bureau was adopted, was created by this city council. We passed an ordinance to create it. We fully fund it. We can dissolve it. It is an arm of the city of Aberdeen. The Chamber of Commerce maintains a separate fund that we replenish every year under the promotional fund. And they administer a fund that they call city marketing. And that's the only thing that is in that fund is our money. And that is the money that is being proposed to fund this activity. I believe this also violates Aberdeen's conflict interest policy. We adopted that in 2017, and I think this activity would conflict with that in two ways. Number one, it prohibits any of us from using our elected position to secure special advantages for themselves. And you can't tell me that if any one of us seeks to do business with the chamber, with the CVB, entities that we fund, that they aren't going to think twice about not engaging with us. We have an advantage over the general public. Secondly, our conflict of interest policy prohibits us from engaging in conduct which discredits the city, which dishonors our government, or constitutes a criminal act. And unfortunately, I think this conduct does all three. This is not a matter that hasn't come up before this council before. Many of us were here when Councilwoman Lori Swanson resigned before the new state law went into effect. And she did that because she thought it was important that she comply with the letter and the spirit of the law. And so she resigned. That was the right thing for her to do. Both the law and our policy itself make clear that we can govern or we can contract with government. We can't do both, and we shouldn't be able to do both. Citizens of Aberdeen have a right to know that the members of their government are not enriching themselves as a result of their positions. We as council member make $8,000 or thereabouts a year. The mayor makes not much more than that. It is a sacrifice when we serve on the city council, but we need to choose. Are we going to do business with the city, or are we going to govern it? The activities that are proposed raise a specter of a public official enriching himself at public expense, and I think that is not acceptable. So I'm announcing today that I'm going to be proposing an ordinance which would make this type of conduct a violation of our ordinance. It is still in the drafting mode, and hopefully we will have it next week. And I would announce that joining me in the efforts to draft that ordinance are some of my colleagues, Councilman Rux, Councilman Olson, Councilman Bunsness, Councilman Johnson, Councilman Lunsman, and Councilman Remley. I would also say that we are in the middle of the budget process. We are going to make appropriations to various entities. I do not plan to support any appropriations to anybody that intends to hire any one of us as either direct employees or independent contractors, or to provide any contracting whatsoever. Thank you.
Well, thankfully I'm able to respond to a few of these allegations. Rob, I'd like to clear up the air as far as this entire thing goes. Before taking office, I sought the counsel of the city attorney as well as my personal attorney, as well as others, and I was assured up and down that public dollars become private when they leave the public's hands. And that's the same distinction, be it the Chamber of Commerce or any of the promotional fund allocation companies that receive these funds. And so I was assured that it was within state parameters and law to do business both with the city, which is obviously something that's under the auspices of the existing state law, as well as with these third-party entities, without restriction on those, but with restriction when it comes to city municipal officers can do business with the city. That's not something that's prohibited, as you alleged, in the state law. That's just something that is regulated by the state. So I presented all the numbers of all my historic business. Most of these companies, I do business with about 12 promotional fund allocation businesses and have for about 12 years. And so I've I don't expect that, that we can say that those people would be choosing to do business with me because of a title when they've got a 12-year track record of doing so, and I've produced quality work for these people at a competitive price. So the purpose of conflict of interest laws, in which I'm not breaking, is to protect the city and citizens from unfair business and paying too much for things to people that they shouldn't be doing business with. Those are not the conditions here, and it's not the situation. And I would also like to point out that the one competitor in the market that will get all this business is a client of yours, and so I don't believe that you could fairly vote on such a thing without a conflict of interest.
Well, there may be, if you're referring to Troy McQuillan, Troy is a friend of mine, he's a client of mine, he's not why I'm here. And these businesses that we're talking about, city, CVB, chamber, are not restricted to hiring people that are in Aberdeen. This is not about competition, Mayor, and this is not, for me at least, this is not personal. I just see this as being an impermissible conflict. This is something that we have never had happen in our community. And and to have people see us paying money on one hand to the chamber or to the CVB, and then have that money turned over and paid to one of us is not the vision that I want people to have of our community.
I spoke to the executive director of the Municipal League at great length about this situation, and she assured me that this is something that happens with frequency in the 309 other communities throughout South Dakota. We'll be the only one with special exception as it relates to not abiding by the state's laws on the matter. So I guess we will have further discussions on the matter. I hope that everyone brings with them an open mind to discuss the situation and how it really affects things. Anything else, Rob?
Not for me, sir.
Anything else from anyone else on the council?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Got a motion from Olson, a second from Johnson. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
And opposed, nay. This meeting is adjourned.